My name is Tom Kearns, Chair. And I'd like to ask my fellow members to introduce themselves and their appointment or affiliation. And as we do this, I'll do a roll call as names appear on our website, and we'll use that for our voting just to expedite everything. So thanks everybody for being here. Peter.
Peter Ward, Select Board Appointee and Vice Chair.
Thank you, Judy.
Judy Zombrecker, Natural Resources Commission appointee.
Thank you, Judy. Paul.
Paul Grasso, Recreation Commission.
Burton.
Burton Flint, Planning Board.
Nancy. Don't know if we have Nancy here yet. Hester. We'll check on Hester. Diane.
Diane Proctor, Select Board appointee.
Thank you. And John.
John Kratzley, Select Board appointee.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for attending this evening. I promise you that Heather has assembled a very exciting agenda. And we are going to hear 6 applications this evening. As folks will recall, we heard 5 last week, 6 this evening, and I think 4 on November 10th to bring us to an even 15. So good work, everyone. And if folks can remember to mute while the presentation is going on, and then when it's time for questions and discussion, remember to unmute. That's also a key to this exercise. We'll hear presentations by the applicants, and then we'll have questions starting with the CPC liaisons. I'll ask for those first, and then CPC committee at large, and then of course public comment, including our representatives from the town, our liaisons, Matt, Christine, and the public in general. All right, and it looks to me like this may be an intense evening for Marcia, who's going to get the stamina to kind of prevail through many of these. So we're really looking forward to that. Heather, what do you think? Are we ready to begin?
Yeah, I think we're ready to go ahead and get started. Marcia, do you want me to start screen sharing?
Yes, please.
Okay, Marcia, it looks like we're going to start with Bruce Freeman Rail Trail.
Yes.
Great, all yours. Thank you so much.
And can you run it as a slideshow, Heather?
Tom, Hester is here if you'd like her to introduce herself.
Oh, yeah, hey, thanks so much. Hester, please introduce yourself, and you'll have to unmute. Hester, you may have to unmute.
Got it. Okay. Sorry. Hester Schnipper from the Concord Housing Authority Board.
Yeah, Hester, thank you. And as we'll all remember, muting is very important, but the second priority is unmuting. Okay, Marcia, thank you.
Heather, are you able to run this as a slideshow?
Can you guys see the screen?
I can see the screen, but I can't, I'd like it run as a slideshow.
Is that, yeah, that's how I have it. Slideshow.
Okay, I'm not seeing it as a slideshow, that's all.
Oh,
Okay, so
Yeah, it does appear with the slide sorter on the left side, Heather. I don't know.
oh, it doesn't appear like that on my screen.
okay.
Yeah, maybe try it one more time.
It may be that you're sharing the app and not the screen.
Uh-huh, yeah, right.
I think if you, you need to go to the top, I think, and allow enable editing. Scroll down, it's at the top of the slide. Keep going. A little bit more.
Did that work?
Yeah, that worked.
Yes.
Yay, bravo.
Okay, next slide. So you're going to be hearing about 4 different applications that have been prepared by the planning office. And we'll start with the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail. Next slide, please. So this request is for a small amount of $25,000. It's to enhance the recreational and open space aspects of the trail as it's been constructed and as it is being constructed right now for the part over Route 2, which is 2B. So we're looking at some additional bicycle racks, some additional landscaping, benches, fencing, and other site furnishings, some signage and directional signs, and ensuring access to existing trails and open spaces. From these slides, the area between the West Concord commuter rail platform and the trail itself, you can see is simply grass right now. There is a crossing where we'd like to add some stone, where we've been talking with the Green Thumbs of West Concord about adding gravel and some planters with grasses in it. So that's one aspect that we're hoping to accomplish. The Concord on Tap sign is something that they would like to see added to a couple of locations in West Concord, so that when we're able to offer water again to cyclists and walkers, that they know where to find it. The slide of the men's feet is right next to the Main Street crossing signal. And this is an oversight. It wasn't part of the design plan to provide pavement over to the signal crossing. So we need to add some stone or a slab of slate to this area or bluestone, so that it doesn't erode and that people's feet don't get muddy. And then as you notice in the last slide, or last picture, there is a gap in the fencing. So those bicyclists who like a little excitement in their lives love to ride down here, and you can see that there's some erosion going on. We'd like to add some fencing in this location to prevent that from happening. Next slide, please. What was really exciting about putting all of this together for you is to go through the various projects that have been done over the years with the funding that you have provided. It's been $710,000, which is a significant allocation of resources for this rail trail. And we've used it to accomplish many different things. The 25% design for phase 2C, additional wildlife survey that was requested by residents in the community. We needed additional engineering survey because when we changed from one engineer to the next engineer at the completion of the phase 25% design, we found that there was a gap between the area between the Neshoba Brook and the commuter rail station that had not been properly surveyed. And then there were areas where we used GIS maps that we had available and the mapping that was available through that. And they found that they needed to do survey under the trees so that we could evaluate a relocation of the trail itself in a couple of locations. So that was the additional engineering survey. And then we had to do, we were requested to do alternatives analysis, particularly with the commuter rail crossing. So that was an extensive project unto itself, as well as the design for the commuter rail crossing. It took us 5 attempts to working with the MBTA to finally come up with a design that was acceptable to them, that would address their concerns, and is the result that we have today. We also needed appraisal services for the various easements, and I failed to calculate the number of easements, but they were both temporary and permanent, on the realm of 20 different appraisals that needed to be done. And this required engagement by 2 appraisers because that's what the state requires. So you have one appraiser goes out and does the appraisal, and then the second appraiser evaluates the work of the first appraiser. So that the funds were used for those appraisal services, as well as the acquisition of the easements. We were very fortunate that we had very kind and generous property owners, some of whom donated their easements. This most significant easement granted was the one from Woods Hill Table. The Cantys granted that easement. Yes, it was part of their special permit requirement for expanding Woods Hill Table restaurant, but it was also a significant contribution on their part. We also were required to do the PS&E design for Phase 2B, which is that extension from Commonwealth Ave over Route 2 into Acton. And there's a breakdown further on in the slide, so we can go over that. And then the final design for the last half mile of Phase 2C. This came as a surprise to me because back in 2016, the state had directed, we're not going to end a trail in the middle of the woods. We will simply incorporate the next phase of design into 2D, that portion that's being built in Sudbury. This past spring, working with the town of Sudbury and the two project managers, one from 2C and one from 2D, I learned, or we came to an agreement, an understanding that it would be more cost effective and beneficial to have Concord complete the final design for the last half mile. So that was a project that required $39,000, and that has completely depleted all funds that I have available. I was able to use a portion of the funds that I had remaining from the planning division and have about $6,000 left and available to complete work. But I learned a month ago that the engineering review required for the Phase 2B is going to require additional funding. So at the end of this year of 2020, I will no longer have any funds available from Community Preservation Act. Next slide, please. The most impressive component of the allocations, appropriations that the Community Preservation Committee has recommended for town meeting and has been voted at town meeting is the amount of additional funds that have been leveraged. It's double what the CPC has allocated. So there's $1,440,000 represented in this list of additional funds for the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail, just for the design and the engineering work that's been done. And from that, we have 3 projects valued at over $16 million in construction that came from the state. So your support for and recommendation for the funding that's been requested to date has had a tremendous impact on the community, especially at this time of the pandemic, where so many people are getting outdoors and really enjoying the trail. Next slide, please. So the funds that the request is expected to be expended as follows: to provide about $10,000 worth of additional landscaping near the West Concord train station, near Winthrop Street, and there's another site next to it, a private property. We would like to also install benches, bicycle racks, fencing, and some other site furnishings. And then there's the signage piece, the Concord on Tap signs and the directional or informational signs. So my request this evening is for $25,000 for the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail. And that's the end of the Bruce Freeman presentation.
Marcia, thank you so much. Very nice presentation. And now some questions and discussion, and our CPC member liaisons are Diane and Hester. Diane?
Thank you. That's very interesting. I just want one clarification that I don't think I understood exactly. You said $16 million from the state. Is that the funding, Marcia, you've received from the state on top of what CPC and private donations have brought to this enterprise?
The CPC has provided $710,000.
I have that down, and then there was
And then
$440,000.
1.4 million that came from other sources, including the state, but including the town and the Friends and grants, and then supplemental funds for design from the state and from Acton for the final design of Phase 2B. And that was just additional design funds. The construction funding is all through the state's TIP program, their transportation improvement program.
Ah, okay.
And those are air quality improvement funds that are primarily used for creating rail trails throughout the Commonwealth.
That's very interesting. When do you imagine that the bridge over Route 2 is going to be completed that would connect Concord to Acton in some fairly significant ways?
Well, the contract requires that it be completed by November of 2021.
Okay.
We're delayed from getting started by maybe 2 or 3 months. But as far as I know, it is still on schedule. So spring of 2022 at the latest.
And the funding for that is predominantly from the state?
That's entirely from the state.
Entirely from
Well,
the state.
it's state and federal funds.
State and federal funding. Okay. Thank you. Those were the major questions I had. You clarified so much by your presentation tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. Hester.
Yes, first, Diane, thank you. The couple of things I still had in mind, you pretty much covered, and I agree. It was a very thorough and useful presentation. And it seems to me that this is like a rather small amount of money which is being asked, which will just make the whole thing even nicer. And I guess that's a comment, not a question. So thank you.
Okay.
One more comment, Tom, if I may. I just think that the families that have exercised easements besides the Contis and the, in their restaurant, and I hope their restaurant is okay right now given COVID. But at any rate, I wonder if there is a way to kind of publicly thank them. Maybe they don't want to be publicly thanked. I think it would be
That's a nice idea.
it would be a lovely gesture given
Yeah.
given how much this has meant to so many people. So.
Nice idea.
Yeah, thank you, Diane. Other members of the committee?
Yeah,
Peter.
this is Peter. So in the application, it was mentioned that the towns of Sudbury and I guess Framingham is now a city, are working to obtain ownership of the right-of-way. Marcia, is that on track to the best of your knowledge?
Yes, it is. The town of Sudbury has allocated the funding for a portion of the acquisition of the CSX right of way, and they are voting on November 3rd for the balance. They received a grant from the Massachusetts DCR, I believe, their Trails program, to provide a portion of the funds, and then they'll be requesting approval for the balance. I'm not sure where the city of Framingham is right now, but that is probably in negotiation or discussion.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Are we going to Judy and John? And then Bob?
Yeah, just a quick question, Marcia. First of all, I'd love to use the trail. I can't wait till it's connected to Acton. So that'll be very exciting. The request that the 25,000 is this for improvements for the existing 2C trail? Is that what you envision?
That's what I've identified these funds for, yes.
Okay.
But we may need some additional funding for some of the signage, the directional and informational signage.
Okay. So is what you have listed in your presentation, was that the last slide, was that kind of an order of priority that you feel the monies would be spent?
It's not a priority. It's all necessary and needed. If anything, the signage is probably the most important piece.
Okay. So as you look at that, your team just assesses what seems to be the best use of the funds once you get estimates.
I usually go to the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail Advisory Committee with the program so that they have final say in how the funds get allocated.
Mhm.
They will hear what's proposed and would say yes, go ahead with that, or this might be a priority if it comes down to having to choose.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go to John and then Burton. John.
Yeah, Marcia, we have a chart of our open grants.
Yep.
And it's dated September 10th. It shows money still unspent in the 2016 and 2018 grants. So is that the money that's gone now?
It should all but $6,000 should be gone. Now I have put together a contract with GPI. They are completing the final design. So we haven't drawn down on those funds yet. So it may not, our paperwork may not have caught up with your paperwork.
But you expect them all.
I expect
To
it
be
all
gone.
to be gone by the end of this year.
And our chart shows the 2018 grant at 40,000, and I think your slide showed 50,000. I suspect obviously one of those is the correct number.
I understood it was 50, maybe it was only 30,000.
40.
40,000.
Maybe,
Okay.
yeah, we'll have Heather
Yeah.
do a follow up on that. Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank
Okay.
you, John. Burton.
Thanks, Tom. Marcia, I just wanted to, I think I may have done this already, but congratulate you on this being the project of the year for small towns transportation in 2019. And I think it's a reflection of the attention to the details and the things that I think this $25,000 allows you to do. I've traveled the length of the Bruce Freeman Trail many, many times, and there's a noticeable improvement. Maybe it's as rail trails have the construction of them has matured in Massachusetts from the northern end down into the end in Concord as it exists today. And I think a lot of that goes towards having these small, even though we've spent a lot of money, having these small things to get the final details right that you can't necessarily know that need to be done until after the project is in use, such as that fence where you've got people, needing to put that up, or the dirt adjacent to the signal switch. And it seems to me that this is sort of the best money spent on a project like this, where you're buttoning up the last little details. I have no questions, just Mike wanted to provide that comment.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Burton. Other members, any other questions? All good. Seeing no hands. Members of the public or our liaisons? Matt.
Yeah, so I guess the first one I'd wonder about is there is the trail around Concord Park, and there is a point of access near the brook that at the moment it's I don't know, difficult to access the pedestrian path there. Is that in the scope of this work? What's happening there?
That was not part of the scope, but I think that is a point well taken, and we'll have to look at that. It's not currently part of this scope.
Okay, yeah, because it's very odd that there's a railing that goes right across where the trail entrance would be.
Could Matt and Marcia, could you just restate that location for us?
Okay, it's right near Neshoba Brook, and it is, if you've been to the trail, you have that big wide plaza over Neshoba Brook, and there's a small component of the former railroad. It was the switch that changed the direction of the rails.
I see.
From there, if you look toward the northern shore of the Neshoba Brook, there's a trail that goes through the woods, and that circumvents the Concord Park Assisted Living. It follows along the top of the bank there. There was envisioned that it would connect there. It was an oversight on our part to that the fence for the rail trail went all along there. There were concerns at one point in time about, and I think they may have listened to Concord Park rather than listen to town staff. So somehow that probably was an oversight to not have that strong connection there. And I see Judy Zombrecker, and she probably knows more information about it because she was part of the conservation restriction.
Yeah, thanks, Marcia.
Right, yeah, I was going to mention there's a conservation restriction, and it's important for the Concord Park residents that there are no bicycles. That is specifically within the conservation restriction because of the nature of their residents. That may be why there is a fence there, but I think it's important to take a look at the information, both the minutes and also the specific conservation restriction that might provide more insight as to why it's designed that way.
Yeah.
And I think it's particularly important given that Concord Park, as part of a recent special permit, agreed to improve that trail to make it more of an accessible trail. And so, you know, that it's not connected, it just makes it inaccessible trail.
Yeah.
So,
Conservation restrictions are in perpetuity, and that predated, I believe, the special permit. So again, I think that it probably should look at the conservation restriction, and in which takes precedence. But the conservation restriction was, I think, set up about 3 years ago. And I know specifically in there, they have no bicyclists allowed on the trails.
but I mean, I guess there could be signage that would take care of that. You're saying that there would be no connection, there will not be a connection of that trail?
No, it didn't say no connection. It simply said no bicyclists. And it may have been, you can put signs up, but I guess, you know, the nature of their residents, they may have feel that it is important for their safety to actually put up a physical barrier for bicycles not to go through there. As we all know, many people don't look at signs and don't consider who else is around.
But I guess right now I just work my way around the edge of the, I mean, as a pedestrian, to be clear, work my way around the end of the railing, you know, and it's very awkward.
Yeah. Again, there might be
an informal trail there, I can say.
Right, but then, you know, maybe there's other solutions to it, but it's very important as part of the conservation restriction that bicyclists do not ride their bicycles through that conservation restriction. And maybe there's another design solution to it, but you know, there is a conservation restriction that details that very clearly.
Okay, and I'd note that the other end of the trail does not have such an obscure entrance. It's very straightforward.
Well, yeah, thank you, Matt and Judy.
Okay, and then I had one other point or question, which is, I guess, you know,
thanks.
When I, you know, think of citizens' response to this, that I think one of the first questions would be, well, gosh, didn't we already finish 2C of the Bruce Freeman? You know, why wasn't this in the scope? And I think that, you know, the answer seems fairly clear that, okay, you know, first of all, there's always some loose ends. Secondly, things have changed, or there's, you know, additions or new amenities that people think of once it starts. But, you know, is there a kind of a way that you could, as thorough as the presentation was, to just sort of say, hey, here are the categories of things, you know, the reason why there is an additional funding request beyond what has already been a ribbon cut project, you know? So it's just a suggestion.
Marsha, maybe on that point, do I recall that you put in a request for additional funds last year that then was, that we did not fund?
Yes.
Yeah. So,
and the year before that.
Yeah. So Matt, I mean, this funding request really goes back to when we were still in construction. It tends to be one of the ones that slipped to the bottom of the priority list within the CPC. I don't think within the planning department.
Okay.
Matt, we have a much clearer picture this year than last year, what it would be used for.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
I still had funds remaining from prior years. So having expended them to continue the design work, I think I'm at a point where I can justify the request.
Okay.
Yeah, and Burton, thanks for acknowledging project of the year. I think maybe project of several decades.
It arrived just in time, as we've seen.
That is for sure. Yeah, incredible. Any other questions from the public? Yeah, Christine.
I just have one. So I'm the observer from the Finance Committee. Who is responsible for maintaining the trail? Is it the town?
Yes, the state retains ownership of the right-of-way, but has transferred the responsibility for maintaining the trail to the town. The town can make improvements along the way if they choose to. And I believe the former town manager and current town managers have been adding funding for that maintenance to the Public Works budget. So it was in the FY 20 and 21 budgets for maintenance. It's not as extensive as many residents probably would like it to be. It's not going to be swept every other week, but they are out there checking every 2 weeks to see what needs to be done.
Will they plow it?
No, they will not. It was not designed to be plowed.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Christine. Any other questions for
With
Marcia?
one exception, around the West Concord train station, I believe that the trail will be plowed so that people can access the railroad platform.
Okay. I see no other questions. Marcia, thank you for that first presentation. Are you ready to move to Wheeler Harrington House and land?
I think I should have had the Bruce Freeman last because that's the one I was most prepared for, but we'll go on to the Wheeler Harrington.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so Wheeler Harrington House and the Harrington Park. It's a small request. It's $20,000 to conduct some public outreach to have a better sense of what the residents are willing to, how they would see the property being used. In the past, community preservation funds have been used to conduct an historic structure assessment and an environmental assessment. We had hoped that that would include a master plan. We were very disappointed in the quality of the master plan. And we actually refused to fund the final phase of that, their so-called master plan, because it was strictly boilerplate. I think they had lifted it from another project and they had not kept us informed as they were moving forward about some of the problems that they ran into. They went through 2 project managers and so forth. So the final master plan was never gelled, if you will. Instead, we sought approval to use the remaining funds to prepare the topographic survey of the property, which you see in that large plan at the bottom of the page. It did not include the floodplain because you can't develop the floodplain, but it does show the hillside as it approaches the Assabet River. There had also been a request to community preservation for funding for roof repairs. The roof ended up getting repaired, but the funds were not used for that purpose. And these funds will be returned for reallocation for historic preservation purposes. Next slide, please. So as members of the Historical Commission have talked about this property, and as planning staff have talked about the property with natural resources and planning, we've had a lot of different ideas about how best to use the property. It is situated right along the Assabet River. It is on the National Register of Historic Places, which was documented and approved in 2013. It's part of a trail network that crosses over Marshall Farm and provides access for residents to the Assabet River. But we have some ideas about what we might do here. And some of you might recall the Ball Benson house that was taken apart when the land transferred to the town. And both the house, which dates to this early 1700s or late 1600s, and the barn, which is an 1800s structure, are in trailers at the wastewater treatment plant. And we had this great idea that wouldn't it be lovely to build the barn and locate the portion of the house as an interpretive center on this site. Well, we need to have that conversation with the community before we start dreaming too big. So we want to have a facilitator work with us to put together the information that's in our historic structures report and our environmental assessment, and help us develop some information that we can provide to the public so that we can have a community engagement process. And this will provide some two-way communication between the town and the public. It gives people an opportunity to voice their opinion and help inform the decision-making that we see needed. And it's inclusive of the community, which is really, really important as we shape the future use for this property. Next slide, please. So the Concord Historical Commission and the Natural Resources Commission are the two town boards that have oversight of the property. NRC for the land and the Historical Commission of the building. The town is responsible for maintaining the building and making sure everything is suitable and appropriate for our current residents who are leasing the site. But what we would want to do is bring the two groups together to help inform that future uses, the possibilities, to compile our information, define our areas of concern, and identify the range of potential uses. This is a view of the driveway that goes into the site. You can see that there's been some improvements made. The copse of trees to the right used to be a tangle of shrubs that's been cleaned out. And then this field is the view toward the house itself. Next slide, please. Oh, I'm sorry, we got to go back. I'm jumping ahead. So the request is for $20,000. It's a nominal cost, but it will help us organize the information we have to date, work with the two boards to come up with a slate of possible uses, and then help facilitate that neighborhood conversation so that we can have input on what that future use will be for the Wheeler Harrington House in Harrington Park.
Thank you, Marcia. And we'll go to our question phase here, and our liaisons are Nancy and Tom, me. And has Nancy joined us? Don't believe so. And yeah. And so I'll just, one comment and clarification, Marcia, from me. And that, so I think the write-up is very thorough. It provides a good history context, and I think a pretty clear sense of engaging a facilitator, developing a community-specific plan beginning next summer, 21, with the facilitator. Is that right? So is the goal to, it says develop a community-specific plan. Is that in essence to complete the master plan that had been started prior?
Yes, it is.
And so do you anticipate then kind of coming back after the facilitation phase for funding to fund that next step of the master plan? Or?
As needed. And again, we'd have to evaluate that in light of all the other projects that might come before you, and understand how the community feels about perhaps more active use at that location.
Right. Good. Thank you. Questions for Marcia from all the members of the committee? Diane?
Again, thank you, Marcia. This is helpful because I wasn't sure I entirely understood what you were trying to. $20,000 for a facilitator strikes me as a lot of money. I think I'm going to become a facilitator. And so, that interests me, just that cost alone. And secondly, the notion that there is a 17 to 8, I am sitting right now in a house in New Hampshire that is exactly a 1790s house with a 19th century barn. So this is a world I know, far too well. So my question is, how do you anticipate in joining a broad community discourse, and what kind of imaginative ideas do you all have about how this land might be used? And does that need to get solidified? I mean, how do you plan to do that?
Well, that's part of the work of the facilitator. Will be looking at our records, looking at the resources that have been prepared through the funding that you've provided previously, the historic structures report and the environmental assessment, and then understanding the property in its historic context with the existing trail network. The Wheeler Harrington property just has this rich history. There's been no archaeology done on the site yet. We might have, out of this, we might say, yes, we need to do this full archaeology project, or wouldn't it be great to reinterpret this site as a farm as it was in the 1700s? I don't know what the possibilities are, but when we do all the what ifs, looking at the information that we have available to us, it's really, really important to pull all of this information together into an easily understood, easily read document to say, here are the possibilities, and then to engage the current NRC and Historical Commission to work up the ideas that they feel that they could support, and then take it to the public to say, here's the realm of possibilities. How do we best utilize this resource that we have in our community? It's a gem, and the house is so fantastic, but it's an antique, and so you need to carefully. These structures that we have in the trailers, they're actually property of the Bemis family, but we've been talking to the Bemis family about, wouldn't it be great to be able to put these into some kind of interpretive context for at this location where there were structures at this time period. So those are the kinds of ideas that we're having, and we need to get that. We need to have the information organized, well presented. We have great expertise on staff, but we're spread very, very thin. And so I just feel that having somebody come in and help us think through and look through everything, and then be able to deliver that to the public through a forum such as Zoom or other, because we're going to be online for quite some time, I'm afraid. So it would be through this kind of process that we would engage as many people as we could. So it could be in the evening, it could be during the day. There's some new ways of communicating that we're discovering.
Thank you. Can I have a quick follow-up? This is my own ignorance. Who's living there right now?
We are currently leasing it to a Concord school teacher, and
so there is someone living there.
There is someone living there, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Diane. Judy.
So I didn't realize it was on the historic register. And if I understood the slide correctly, it's both the house and the landscape. Is that, did I, and is that the whole 15.6 acres that's on that?
I believe it is, yes.
Yeah. So does that, what does that mean? Does that put bounds around the type of work that can go there?
It might limit some modern efforts, but that's a good question, Judy. I don't have an answer right now. Maybe Heather. Heather, are you?
Yeah, National Register nominations are just honorary designations. So there's no, unless there's federal funding involved in a project, then you can do whatever you want with a National Register property.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Except destroy it.
As long as they're not using federal funds.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I was just curious what that meant.
John? John, do you have a?
Oh, Marcia, is there an example of this community engagement? Is this a first, or have we had one or two in town?
Well, we have had some. Yeah, we've had lots of different ones. I mean, the entire outreach that was done for the comprehensive long range plan was a massive community outreach effort. Our 2015 housing production plan was involved a lot of community outreach. So there are different ways that we can engage the public in this conversation. It's bringing all the pieces together that we really need help with organizing, and then meeting with the boards and committees to make sure that whatever we put forward is acceptable to the Natural Resources Commission and the Historical Commission.
Do you have a particular approach in mind, or is this what the facilitator tells us what to do?
I would hope the facilitator would have some ideas that we could benefit from. Yes, we have ideas, but this online world is very different from the way we used to run workshops and meetings. And so there may be, I know when we worked on the comprehensive long range plan, we worked with a group called Co-Urbanize, and they provided mapping, they provided surveys, they did QR codes. So we could do some visual things out in the field. We might even have some site visits where the public could come. We would walk them through. We might have models, we might have plans or graphics. So there might be some different ideas that we develop as this moves forward, which is probably why it's a bigger price tag than just having a facilitator facilitate a meeting. Usually that's around $5,000 to $8,000. But we're looking for something a little more robust, and we're looking for something that will be engaging in written format.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. Other members of the committee?
So this is Peter. Marsh, I was struck by one of the lines in the application that reads, the potential for the property has been largely forgotten since its purchase in the 1970s. And I guess I would ask the question a different way. Are we perhaps being aggressive enough? I mean, this is a fairly large parcel of land that just sounds like it has so much potential. And I just was wondering, what type of feedback you've had in terms, just generally speaking, in terms of use and access of the property, to date and going forward, perhaps.
I haven't had a lot of public, we haven't heard a lot. The former tenants, the Benish family, they were a couple of the Benishes, took wonderful care of the property, and kept it fairly secluded. They maintained the house beautifully. They discovered different things. They had a whole, like all sorts of artifacts in the basement, that they uncovered at different points in time. But I don't think it was until the trail system from, I'm thinking the Second Division Brook through the community gardens, and I think is it Arena? No, it wasn't. I can't remember. Maybe Judy can help me.
Yeah, it's the trail system was put in that connected all the way from Main Street down to this property. There's about 3 trails that Bob White built, and that was about 3 or 4 years ago, because there was the purchase of the Rogers property, which is where the community gardens are, and then it cuts across the back of the Marshall Farm and then over to this property. So my observation is, since I'm over there a fair amount, that certainly with COVID, but even before that, there are many more people are using those trails now. And I do see cars actually parked up in the parking lot sometimes, which, prior to that, I never saw before. So that's increased some of its use, but it's still not, many people still don't know about it, I would say.
So there's also the easements that were purchased for the trails to complete the access along the Assabet River over 2 properties, at Spinoza's and one other.
Yeah, I'd forgotten about those, yeah.
So we've slowly been trying to open up and rethink all of this, but it's the fact that the house is still there in context of the landscape, the farming landscape, that has sort of piqued my curiosity about how we might interpret our agricultural heritage for this site, as well as providing people with the access to the trails and to the different things that are going on here. I know that the current tenant has worked with some of the school classrooms at Concord Carlisle to remove invasive plants from the tree line, and they are starting a pollinator meadow area just near that copse of trees where the parking area is located. So we're slowly seeing some change, but we'd like to really think through the master plan. What is this going to look like? How does the community want to interact with it?
Okay, thank you, Peter. Thank you, Judy. Any other questions from the committee? Seeing no hands. Questions from the public? Christine.
Hi. Just wanted to go back to the history a little bit. I was trying to, so CPC provided funds earlier, looks like 2013, maybe in 2015, to do some of these studies that you mentioned at the introduction. How much was, do you remember how much they provided?
I'm sorry, I don't remember.
And why do you think the money wasn't, or the studies weren't done in a way that were useful? What happened and how do we make sure that doesn't happen again?
Those are really, we wish we knew. The historic structures report is awesome. And we contracted with a lead planning agency, and they subcontracted with the historic structures report group and the environmental assessment group. The environmental assessment is a little, it's not the most robust, but it is a good assessment. Where I feel that they let us down is in bringing all the pieces together. They had some problems with their project management team, and the project manager assigned to this program or project left unexpectedly, and we were not informed when that happened. The person that came in as the next project manager didn't really clarify what they were doing or why they were doing it. And then they disappeared. And there was somebody who was trying to clean up and put forward 3 possible scenarios, which were not very imaginative at all. One was that the town would use it as town offices. The town could continue its lease with a private entity to reside there, or and I forget what the third was, but it was very poorly executed. This what we were looking for. It did not meet the needs or the requirements of the request for proposals. So we ended the contract without that final piece.
And the we is your organization, Marcia?
The Town of Concord.
The Town of Concord, the planning group, or what group owned
Well,
it?
it's the town, only the town manager can enter into contracts. And so
Who was overseeing this?
the planning division, my
Okay.
staff and I were overseeing the project.
Okay.
Our recommendation to the town manager was that that the contract be ended, and that they not get final payment. And that was upheld, and that's how it was ended.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Christine. Other questions for Marcia? Matt? We'll go Matt and then John.
Okay, I guess, when I think of other sites in Concord, that have an agricultural feel and a historic house that's adjacent, I mean, it's a different ownership structure and management, but I think of like the Thorough birthplace with Gaining Ground right next to it. Both have strong programmatic aspects. Here, it's a more out of the way site. There's undeniable value in the recreational and conservation aspects of the larger part of the site, but the house site itself, has always been kind of private. I mean, it's not private literally, but in terms of just respecting the tenants' privacy, it's not really accessible. And I just wonder, given the number of different historic resources and sites and the out of the way nature of this particular one, I mean, has anybody thought of the opposite of going big, of maybe just selling the house and the immediate, create a lot and sell that and just maintain the conservation area? Because I just don't see how the town is going to be able to support, a set of programs around this, especially when there are other competing, not literally competing, but, similar kinds of sites that have a lot of association in the American imagination, like Henry David Thoreau. So I guess it's going to be a big challenge. And I think that there may be a reason that there's really not been much done with this since the 70s. And it's been kind of difficult to keep up with the maintenance as a town and everything else. I guess my one lingering concern would be just around preservation. I guess being on the National Historic Register doesn't protect the building. So I don't know what could be done to ensure that protection. Is clearly not in a historic district, but our demolition delay bylaw is not that effective. So I would hate to sell it off and then have it be demolished immediately, but I'm still a little bit concerned that we may be creating yet another plan for something that we may not end up doing much of.
So Matt, I'm just trying to, you got a few questions in there potentially, but one is, instead of going big, go small. Has there been consideration of selling off the house? I heard.
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe Marcia, that's something to I don't know if that's been an idea that's been on the table.
Before I go there, I think one should read the history of acquiring this property. And it was because of this house that the Historical Commission was formed, because they felt that there was a plan to tear the house down. And a group of citizens who were very concerned about preservation of the house stepped forward and came to town meeting, and the Historical Commission was formed. There's a long history here. So before I go down the road of selling the house, I would like to have the community provide some input.
Okay. So, but I mean, it hasn't been considered as an option. Is that?
That's fair to say.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Matt. John?
Yeah, Marsh, I'm going back to that chart of open projects, and there is this 2016 $40,000 for the roof. Are we getting that all back?
Yes, you should be getting that all back. I've talked with the town manager's office about that. They have some, they're unable to identify how much was spent on the roof replacement. We've had some changes in our facilities team over the years, and I believe the funds came from the rental of the property, but it's not clear who, what, when, or how much. And so rather than try to figure all of that out, they felt that simply returning it would be the better thing to do.
The full 40,000.
Full 40,000.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, John. Any other questions for Marcia? Seeing none, I would suggest, Marcia, you're holding up well. I would also suggest, Heather, that we are right on schedule. Heather, are we ready to go to the next one? Okay, Marcia, ready to go to housing production plan?
Housing production plan, you got it.
Yes, thank you.
So this is a request for $30,000. Our housing production plan was last prepared in 2015. It is required to be updated every 5 years. And the housing production plan outlines our community's needs and future housing needs and the community strategy for developing affordable housing. That plan is used to inform the community housing portion or component of the community preservation plan that you prepare annually. The slides here, this is the cover from our 2015 plan, and a slide of the public forum that we were able to hold back in 2015 that involved about 50 to 60 residents in discussion about affordable housing. Next slide, please. So this plan looks at our demographic information, which will be based on our 2020 census information that will become available next summer. It provides an analysis of the market needs. It looks at a 5-year time period of what we might be needing or where things might be going. It talks about different ways we might implement additional housing, and it will meet the requirements for the state's Department of Housing and Community Development. The 4 slides here, upper right is the Emerson Annex, which was one of the first projects created by the town in 1987. There are 11 units, 10 of which are affordable, and the deed restriction on each of those units for about 4 of them are going to be expiring in 2027. So we're keeping an eye on those units. We'll be talking to people as they approach that time period to say, how do we keep this as an affordable unit in the town of Concord? The next project, the green and yellow buildings, that's from that's Walden on Walden Street, and those were developed by the former Concord Housing Trust. 3 of these units have turned over this past year, so they've gone through that resales process, and we continue to work with that homeowners association to make sure that things are being done appropriately to maintain each of the units. And then the Concord Outfitters building, the planning board considered amending the zoning bylaw to change the criteria for the combined business residence district or zoning to allow the upper units to be converted from office or the retail support for the retail businesses on the first floor to residential use. And then another item, the door there is from Ingham Lane, where funds were used to buy down, further buy down. They proposed meeting or providing a unit that met 150% of the area median income, and a creative reuse or creative use was to buy down that value to make it 80% of median. So now it now counts on the town's subsidized housing inventory. So those are some of the different ways that we can provide affordable housing or different housing options in the community. Next slide, please. So our housing production plan has 3 sections. There's the comprehensive housing needs assessment, there's the identification of affordable housing goals and implementation strategies. And these are screenshots from the 2015 report. So it requires extensive public outreach through online survey and mailed survey. Those were the 2 methods that we used previously. We're going to need virtual meetings, and we're going to have to consider other public outreach options. Next slide, please. So, we have diverse housing needs, and this plan takes into consideration and looks at all of that. We postponed or delayed a year. Normally it would have been required in 2019. We would have started this effort so that we'd be doing it now, but we wanted to wait for our 2020 census because that will provide us with more up-to-date information, and our numbers will change because we see numerators on top, denominators on the bottom. The denominator changes with with each decennial census. So it's based on the total number of housing units that we have, and we need to provide 10% according to the state's requirement. So this housing production plan is utilized by not just your committee, but it's also the planning board looks at it, the Zoning Board of Appeals, the Housing Development Corporation, the Concord Housing Authority, and many entities that end up supporting affordable housing in the community. So this is will be well used and well received. I've requested $30,000, and that's based on a recent, the town of Acton undertook their update in 2019, and their estimate for that was $26,700. So that's why I thought 30,000 should be requested. And any questions? Because that's the end of my slideshow for here.
Yeah, thank you, Marcia. And so our liaisons are Burton and John. Burton?
Thanks, Tom, and Marcia, thank you. So could you draw maybe a line a little bit between the projects that you described as being part of our affordable housing efforts of one shape or another, and how the housing production plan leads to those things happening, as opposed to, and it maybe also its relation to the long range plan, which certainly has a housing component that's per decade.
Well, the housing production plan looks at demographics. So we know that the town of Concord is aging. And so we might have a conversation about what kinds of housing will we need for this changing demographic. Mm-hmm. And from that the plan might lay out different options or different approaches to things, and then it would be part of that public outreach discussion that would say, okay, this is an area where we think we need X, Y, or Z. The idea of ways of requiring developers to build affordable housing might cause the planning board to look at its zoning to say, okay, we're going to have a higher percentage, or, you know, we've had different people suggest, well, maybe we should have affordable housing in industrial areas. And it was out of a prior plan that, you know, zoning was changed for the West Concord industrial area to allow residential in there. So there are ideas that are sometimes planted. There might be sites that are identified. Back in 2010, we already knew that there would be a site near the prison that would be for affordable housing. We didn't know what that project would look like or what might ultimately be built there, but the CHDC, Concord Housing Development Corporation, had worked with the state, had worked with the Walden Woods project to identify this piece of land as excess and had it transferred to this nonprofit group. So we identify sites where housing might be happening or might be potentially available. And, looking at our school structures, knowing that, okay, we're going through a middle school process, we might say, well, what's going to happen to Peabody? Maybe that would be suitable for affordable housing in the future. As we look at the 2229 Main Street project, people have said, well, maybe some component of that, some aspect of that where the soil is clean, maybe we could put in affordable housing there. So there are those conversations that take place, and it's supposing or proposing, yes, we might look at different ways to provide the housing that we need.
Okay, thank you. That helped connect those dots. And a couple of more nuts and bolts questions. So you said that the housing production plan is required to be updated every 5 years. Is that a state law requirement? And
in order to, it's not a, well,
let me ask.
It's not a mandate. It's not a mandate. It's not that we have to.
Okay.
In order to maintain our protections as under affordable housing, if we had protections available, we should have an up-to-date housing production plan. So in the case of if we were at 9.5% and a hostile project were proposed and we didn't want that, if we didn't have an up-to-date housing production plan, it might swing in favor of the developer rather than in the favor of the town.
I see. Okay. So it's part of the process to keep to be able to maintain some control over the planning process for development in town.
Correct.
Okay. And we know that this is something that I think about on a number of projects, so I don't mean to pick on this one, but it's projects like this one where it's a regular recurring, for lack of a better term, an administrative expense that the town sees coming. What is about this expense that seems to be that makes it suitable for CPC funding versus coming out of the general town budget?
Well, I think it's directly supportive of community housing, period.
Okay. Okay.
And it's the basis for your annual update for your community preservation plan.
Okay. Yeah, I guess my question goes not to the value of the plan for this committee, but just, and again, I don't mean to pick on this project, but sometimes I wonder about projects that get directed to the CPC for funding versus would be part of the overall town budget, and the projects that, in my mind, one of the things are sort of regularly recurring known expenses that seem like they would be part of sort of the town's overall administrative budget. But you've answered the question, so thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Burton. John, questions for Marcia?
Yeah, Marcia, it's a little related to Burton's question. Do you recall who paid for the 2015 production plan?
The Community Preservation Committee, Community Preservation Funds.
And do you know what amount we approved back then?
I don't have it off the top of my head. I can look it up for you.
I think those are my questions. I just was curious if there was a history of supporting this.
Thank you, John. Other members of the committee? Ms. Diane?
Thank you again, Marcia. I have exactly the same question. I don't think I entirely understood the response to Burton's question, Marcia. When I read this, I thought, boy, this is important. What you're doing is critical. I mean, the need to be able to demonstrate our commitment to affordable housing, the importance of affordable housing in Concord is clearly central, to everything we do. But I couldn't understand why this, as a recurring 5-year effort, wasn't just part of the natural town budget. And I don't think I entirely understood why it isn't. I mean, if we did it 5 years ago, maybe that's the reason. But I guess if I were an administrator, running the zoo, says Elliot McGrew, no more than 2, and we know what a disaster that was. But if I were an administrator trying to run this, I would think I would build this in to a regular evaluation every 5 years. So I guess I'm not quite sure I understand.
Well, from a financial perspective, when you have a source of funding that is directed, that requires money to be spent on community housing,
okay,
the town, the finance director, the town administrator, the town manager say, why aren't we using these funds that are specifically for community housing to help prepare the plan?
Okay, I just didn't for Burton, you connected the dots. For me, you have now done so. I didn't entirely understand that answer. I understand it better now. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Diane. Judy?
It's not a question for Marcia, but I guess I'd like to present this to the committee. Back about a year ago, the League of Women Voters held a forum. We invited chairs of CPC committees from surrounding towns, and I believe it was in Acton, but their common practice is to fully fund these type of efforts. Their approach is that the CPC funds are used actually to meet the town needs, and that's what they focus on. So I think it's a question for the CPC on how we want to distribute funds, not necessarily there's a policy in CPC or a policy within the town administrator that this is the right type of project, but other towns would fully fund this through CPC.
Thank you, Judy. Other committee members? Questions for Marcia? Seeing and hearing none. Members of the public? Matt?
So I think there was a phrase there in one of the screenshots of the housing production plan update from last time that said, Concord has diverse housing needs. But I think that in this past year, one of the things that has become clearer, and it just come to the fore, not only in town, but nationally, is Concord has needs for diversity. And that really there's an opportunity here to change the focus of the plan to trying to address social and economic inequities, and also to enrich the town through greater diversity. Now, we can't guarantee that that will be the outcome of any individual affordable housing project, but I think that we should really be less focused in the future meeting a quota, and more focused on helping people and helping ourselves by creating a more just and economically and socially just society. So I don't know, that sounds really a little maybe beyond the scope of a typical housing production plan, but I just would like to raise my hand, at least as a member of the select board, to say, how can we work to change that focus, especially as we're going to be entering the beginning of a decade where we have a decade really to do something before the next census resets things. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. Other questions or comments from members of the community? Okay, well done. Marcia, thank you.
Okay.
Heather, how are we doing? We're a little ahead of schedule, doing well that way. Are we going to move to Regional Housing Services Program? Yeah, Heather says yes, we can do that. Marcia, are you going to take this one?
I'm taking this one too.
Hey,
So I-
bravo, bravo.
I think I still have a voice. The Regional Housing Services Office, we're requesting $25,000 to be matched by the town budget, general fund, for $50,000 this year. And our Regional Housing Services Office provides a wide range of support for affordable housing efforts in the community. They help us with they conduct the monitoring of the rental and the home ownership units to make sure that they remain affordable and that they meet the requirements for their deed restrictions. They help administer our programs. They work with the town of Concord as we are participants in the Metro West Home collaborative, I guess. And through that group, we've been able to identify additional funds to construct affordable housing in the community. They provide, there are 4 members of the RHSO, and they provide local support to our town committees. They've worked with the Concord Housing Development Corporation, the Concord Housing Authority, and this past year with the Select Board and with I can't remember, the Affordable Housing Funding Task Force, I think it was, to look at what kinds of regulations we might need to have in place, what kinds of legislation that we might need to help fund affordable housing efforts in the community. They've also helped with project development. They worked with the Concord Housing Authority and with Habitat for Humanity on 2 projects this past year, and have helped with, they've conducted the resales to property owners for the Walden Street project. And every so often, they help residents with small projects that they might have in their home. There's a small grants program, but also when there are conflicts among homeowners association, they might help work through some of those issues or provide direction for residents to go. Or if they have, if they're, say, refinancing or whatever, they might help with that residents' assistance. So those are the kinds of things that our Regional Housing Services Office provides to the community. Next slide. So I've outlined several of the projects already that they worked on: the resale of the affordable homes, the Affordable Housing Trust Study Committee, and our tax increment finance agreement. The Concord Housing Authority has been working to for HUD repositioning of their units. HUD is giving up their units. We want to make sure that they remain affordable as they are transferred to our local housing authority. And so the Regional Housing Services Office has been providing support to the Concord Housing Authority and doing some of their studies for them. And then with the Habitat for Humanity's local initiative program application to the Department of Housing and Community Development for 930 Main Street. So this is a screenshot of the RHSO webpage. It's very robust. There's lots of information there, and they keep that all up to date. So that's a general view of what they've provided for us and what they do for this amount of money. They would also help with the housing production plan as we move forward with some of the needs assessment. So part of the funding might come from here, or they might come from the housing production plan funds that were appropriated. There are to Matt's point about affirmative, one of the things that the Home Consortium has recently undertaken is affirmative fair housing and the requirements for affirmative fair housing. And we're talking about providing some testing in our communities that are part of the Home Consortium, and looking at the impediments to fair housing. So, or affirmative housing. So that's on our radar, and it's something that the Home Consortium is looking at. And we know Liz Rust is also on this meeting tonight, so she might have some additional information that she can offer if I can't answer all your questions, but that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Marcia, and Liz, thank you for being here. And Diane is our liaison.
Marcia, this is, if anything, something that we're underfunding. I mean, the work that Liz does and the work in collaboration with your work is so important to the town, and not just to our town, but to other towns as well. And I actually don't have any questions except to thank you for the work and the effort that goes into all of this and its importance. So there may be questions from the rest of the committee, but I appreciate the thoroughness of the report and the importance of this effort.
Thank you, Diane. Other members of the committee, questions for Marcia or Liz? John?
Is this the same number as last year?
No, it is $5,000 more. So it's a $10,000 increase. What we found is that Liz is so successful, had so many different projects. The amount of work increased, and as the number of our units increases, so does the effort required. So we will be adding, hopefully adding 83 units of affordable housing next year, and that will take some effort, and so that's what it's based on.
Great, thank you, John. Other questions from the committee?
This is Peter. Marcia, am I correct in remembering that we are one of the few towns that actually splits the expense for the RHSO between CPC and the town itself?
You are correct.
Yes.
Liz might have some additional information there.
I can say that for the 9 towns that are part of the RHSO, Lexington fully funds out of their operating budget, and all the other towns are 100% on CPC except for Concord that splits.
Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Liz. Other questions for Marcia or Liz? Seeing none, questions from the public, please. Ali.
Hi, it's not a question, but it's a statement of support. I'm Lee Smith. I'm the chair of the Concord Housing Development Corporation. On your agenda next, and I was also the vice chair of the Affordable Housing Trust Fund Bylaw Committee, and Liz staffs both of those boards and committees, and her service and assistance is invaluable, and I cannot recommend this highly enough.
Thank you so much.
Tom, if I could add, when if frequently we overspend, we oversubscribe our hours with the Regional Housing Services Office, and when that happens, it's the Concord Housing Development Corporation that will help fund the gap. So I don't have to come back to you to say, can we have more? Or we put forward a reasonable proposal, and sometimes with the support to the Concord Housing Development Corporation, and this year we may be seeing some additional support to the Grantham Group. They have committed to also provide funding if it goes above that $50,000 request that we have for you, or the $25,000 total.
Thank you, Marcia. John.
Yeah, Marcia, costs or the money's essentially staffing? Or are there other ways the money's used?
It is staffing, but it's also office support, and they do pay rent because they're at 37 Knox Trail. They pay rent to the town of Concord for the maintenance and the ongoing office administration of that building.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. Other members of the committee? Members of the public? Well done. Thank you, Marcia and Liz. And Heather, are we ready to move to the affordable housing buy down application? Okay, Heather gives us a yes on that. And so is this going to be a presentation by Lee and Liz?
Yes.
Yay, okay, great. Thank you.
Do
And
we have the slide presentation?
Heather will put up the slides and then you may proceed.
Thank you. So again, my name is Lee Smith. I'm the chair of the CHDC Concord Housing Development Corporation. And I'm here tonight to seek support for our request for $500,000 for the creation and preservation of affordable housing in Concord. Next slide, please. So at the moment, CHDC, I believe, is the primary town entity with the power and ability to create affordable housing, preserve affordable housing with the use of town funds. As you know, at our most recent town meeting, the Affordable Housing Trust bylaw was approved. What remains to be done in that process is actually seating the members of the Affordable Housing Trust. And I'm aware that it's most likely in the intention of folks in town to make that trust essentially the receptacle of funding sources, whatever they may be around town, and then that the trustees would then make allocations as projects come up. But our dilemma this year is that because that trust is yet to be established, given the timing of your application process and the next town meeting, there's really a void there. So as CHDC has acted in the past, we're asking to receive these funds to be able to act nimbly when an opportunity, hopefully multiple opportunities, present themselves to either acquire new properties or buy down opportunities to create and preserve affordable housing. Next slide, please. So the buy down program has been identified, as you know, in the 2015 Housing Production Plan, as Marcia described earlier in her presentation, as well as the 2018 Envision Concord Comprehensive Plan, and is one of the specific CPT criterion for community housing. The buy down funds subsidize the difference between what a unit would sell for at market price as compared to an affordable price. And in exchange, we're essentially purchasing a perpetual restriction on that property to be used exclusively for affordable housing. And the goal in each of these instances is to create additional units to be eligible for the subsidized housing inventory as regulated by DHCD. So in the past, CPC buy down funds have been used, as I think Marcia uses an example, one unit at Ingham Lane, where it was going to be eligible for, I believe, 100% AMI. And we used those funds available to reduce that to an 80% AMI affordability level. And then most recently, approximately a year ago, CHDC was able to acquire directly from the homeowner the property at 930 Main Street, which is a single family home. And we're working in partnership with Habitat for Humanity to redevelop that into a 2-unit residential project. And we were able to do that in conjunction with generous contributions from the Concord Housing Foundation, Habitat's contributions, as well as the CPC funds and free cash funds. As an example, that total project cost was approximately $512,000, and of that, CPC contributed about $186,000. So this request also makes buy down funds available to preserve existing units if a situation arises. For example, in the Emerson Annex, 11 condominiums were developed in 1988, and that was kind of at the earlier days of our affordable housing programs around the state, and they were not in perpetuity. Rather, they have expiration clauses. So in 2006, one of those units was lost as an affordable housing unit, and I think the town at that time recognized that it was really an opportunity lost, and if we had funds available on hand, essentially at a moment's notice, we'd have the opportunity to try to save those units as affordable units. So over time, about 5 units have sold, and CPC funds have been used to preserve those units, whereby they're transferred to what they call a universal deed rider that preserves the affordable housing restriction in perpetuity. So there are 4 units that remain with that older restriction, and those are expected to expire between 8 and 15 years from now. But a seller could decide to sell at any time. So the availability of funds now, if one of those units became available, would be critical to try to again preserve those units as affordable in perpetuity. So in summary, we're asking for these funds to create and preserve affordable housing with buy down and purchase funds available at a moment's notice. As you know, pursuant to your criteria number 4, those funds are available to create affordable housing units by buying down the purchase price and also buy down of new construction. I won't read to you your own criteria, but again, it's also consistent with our housing production plan, as Marcia was describing, particularly with strategy number 10, and consistent with the 2018 Envision Concord goal number 2. In the past number of years, the Concord CPC funds have been appropriated over 7 town meetings for approximately $800,000 of buy down funds, and that has resulted in the preservation of 2 units, creation of 2 units, and increased affordability in 1 unit. These funds are really critical to have on hand at a moment's notice when a property comes available, and CHDC is poised and nimble enough to be able to act either directly or through a developer or otherwise to be able to handle these transactions rather than risk losing the opportunity if we had to wait for town meeting or other bureaucratic approval. So thank you, and happy to try to answer any questions you might have.
Yeah, thank you, Lee. We're ready to go to questions, and Diane and Burton are our liaisons. Diane, questions for Lee or Liz?
Thank you so much. I'm sorry that I'm not a realtor and I'm not always conversant with these technicalities, Lee. Could you give us a hypothetical? Let's say a house comes on the market for $750,000, and you use this money to do precisely what?
Well, if it was just a single family,
but go ahead if you wouldn't mind helping me. Go ahead.
Sorry. So if it's a single family home on the market for $750,000, that's probably out of our price range. But okay. 930 Main Street is a perfect example where we were fortunate enough whereby the seller has had a particular interest in affordable housing in the town of Concord. So she, it took a lot of negotiation, but she ultimately agreed to sell her home to CHDC for what was maybe slightly below market value. So, right. Okay. Right. So if I'd say if we're in the, maybe, I don't want to be pigeonholed, but if we're in the range of, 500,000 or below, then, then we're at least able to have a conversation.
I'm not trying to pigeonhole you at all, Lee. I'm just trying to understand. So what you're saying, do you actually buy the house? And
we did with 930 Main Street, but there are other examples like if there's new construction, perhaps there are affordability components to it. So for example, the Ingham Lane home, they were going to sell it at what the corresponding sale price is for someone at 100% of area median income, and by contributing cash towards that sale price, we are able to make it affordable or available to eligible party to acquire it at 80% of area median income. So it made it more, quote unquote, affordable.
Yeah,
Those are two examples that we can
that
point
helps
to.
me. That helps me so much, and I'm sorry to be
Not at all.
unconversant with this
Not
kind
at
of
all.
conversation. So now my second question, therefore, is the question of in perpetuity interests me so very much, because the property adjacent, very close to our home in Concord, the Emerson extension, we've heard that several of those apartments are coming up. So that these investments that you make, which are so invaluable to the whole community, but these investments you make are only for the immediate the immediate inhabitant of the structure, and do not, in fact, then carry on so that we can assure that this will always be an affordable housing project, or not? I'm sorry that I need that clarification.
I think it's actually both. So I think, and I will confess that I have not been on the board long enough to have dealt with one of those units as a transaction directly, but
Okay.
Liz can correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding basically is that if one of those affordable units becomes marketed for sale, they have to provide notice to the town and I think DHCD, et cetera. And I think then we have the opportunity to discuss with them whether they'd be willing to accept perhaps cash as a reduction in what they would ultimately sell it for in exchange for a more affordable sale price, and in exchange, so that they're made whole. But then on the other side, we're selling it to an eligible party for less, and then in exchange for that, upon that sale, the unit would be restricted in perpetuity. Okay. By virtue of a deed rider.
That helps me a lot. So those properties on the Emerson extension were just never in perpetuity. And this particular effort that the CHCC now is exercising establishes these covenants as they were in perpetuity. Is that true?
In the instance of a condominium, there would be what they call a deed rider attached to the deed for the sale to the new owner that would restrict both the resale price and the income levels to eligible parties going forward in perpetuity.
Thank you very much. That helps me a lot.
And to enable for that to happen, someone's got to get paid. And that's what these funds will be used for.
That part I understood.
Yeah.
The rest of it
Thank you, Diane. Liz, do you want to follow up?
it just puzzled me, because we've heard, so many different relationships that we have with various properties around town. And I hate to see us spending money on something only to then have to renegotiate the entire relationship, once somebody else sells the property. So it's all that I'm trying to understand.
Thank you.
I don't think we'd want to pursue it if it wasn't going to be a restriction in perpetuity.
Thank you, Lee. That's a big help. Tom, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. Liz, did you want to follow up on
I
that?
just wanted to clarify, so that these funds for Emerson Annex would be held essentially in reserve. So should an owner say, I'm going to sell one of these 4 units, there are funds available to create that perpetual deed restriction for the purchaser of that property. So the person who's selling gets out, and that's all fine. It's really about who's buying it and under what restriction will they be purchasing. So these funds go into the purchasing side of the equation.
Thank you. That all of this is a big help, and I'm sorry not to be conversant. I read everything and was still not conversant. Thank you, Burton. I think
Liz. Burton.
Yes, thank you. Just two straightforward questions. We've been moving away from, or I guess, trying to emphasize funding projects where the spending happens soon rather than banking money over the course of multiple years. Can you give us a sense of how long you think this money? Am I understanding correctly that you're banking this as your as a fund so that you have the money there because the projects arise on short notice, right?
That's right, and unfortunately, it's entirely unpredictable. We don't know when a unit might be put on the market. I mean, obviously, units are put on the market every day, but it's those that are within kind of our bandwidth in terms of price and other
Right.
other factors that make it a possible project for us.
But do you have a general sense that this money would probably be put to use within, I don't know, 12 months, 24 months?
Well, Liz, maybe you can help me. I know for the 930 Main Street, we had those funds on hand for quite a few years, maybe 5 years. Does
I
that
think
sound
that
right?
the funds expended were from a couple of CPA articles, but the bulk of them were 2016
Okay.
annual town meeting.
Okay.
So
So these,
I think with the success also of 930 Main Street, I think that there's open up some possibilities of how these transactions could work. And also being mindful of keeping funds available should any opportunities come forward at Emerson Annex. So always to have funds on hand. So that's part of the strategy also.
and I presume that in a way, if you have a larger pot of money, this funds could be spent more quickly because you have more projects available to you. I imagine there are a lot of things that you could make work, but you don't have the funding to close the gap. So my one other question is, well, I guess you might want to add a 0 to your request, but how do you get to 500,000? We get to, as the year progresses and we consider proposals, we oftentimes, we're funding something that already has a price tag on it. And sometimes, maybe a project gets 80% or what have you. What is it about 500,000 that makes sense for you?
Well, I think it's a reasonable figure, just given the property values in Concord that we see. So, perhaps, one likely scenario is that's not enough to buy a single family home, and then we're using that plus fundraising from other sources, whether it be free cash or donations or otherwise, and we can cobble together all those funds that we might need to buy one property. Alternatively, perhaps we're able to use a portion of the 500 to make 1 or 2, possibly 3 projects work for our stated goals. But
Okay.
it's like you said, adding a 0 would give us a lot more flexibility, but 500,000 just doesn't go very far.
Okay, thank you.
Other members of the committee, Judy.
Yes, kind of a follow-up on Burton's question. Thank you for this. This is very helpful for me too, because this is all new stuff. About how much would, like we're talking about the Emerson condos and possibility of, like that money on hand in case some of those start coming up. How much would, for instance, a unit like one of those Emerson condos require to get in place in perpetuity a deed restriction?
Well, we're aware of a unit in 2007 where I believe it was, Liz, please correct me if I'm wrong here, but about 275,000 is CPA funds plus an additional 30,000 from DHCD was required. In 2007, CHDC put in about 27,000 and 30,000 from DHCD. 2008 CPC funds were 175,000 with another 15,000 from DHCD. So those are some examples in the Emerson complex itself.
Okay, great, thanks. And does that, this may not be well, I guess the other one would be, for instance, on Ingham Lane. I had 2 questions on that. About how much money did you say that was put into that to bring that down to the 80% AMI?
That was $101,200.
Okay, and was that, did that allow to put a deed restriction in for in perpetuity, or was that just for a one-time purchase?
In perpetuity, as far as I know.
In perpetuity, okay.
Yeah.
So, okay, I was just trying to get an idea of potentially, and I recognize these units kind of come on, you can't predict, kind of how many this might be able to help buy down in terms of kind of a range. And it sounds like it could be 4, it could be 2, could be 1.5, I guess.
Right.
Thank you, Judy. John.
Okay.
Yeah, Lee and Liz, our September chart of open projects shows the 2012 Concord Housing Development Corporation, 80,000, and it shows 33,000 still remaining to be spent. Is that 33,000, did that disappear into 930 Main Street, or is it still available?
That's been allocated to Junction Village, pre-development costs for Junction Village, as well as probably the 2015 amount, I think, of $45,000. I don't know your chart, but that's
Yeah,
what
no, that's the 2015 does show a direct project called Junction Village Assisted Living, but the
Yep.
2012 has no mention of Junction Village. It's
it was
called development.
classified as Junction Village, I think, after the original town meeting article. I think that's the documentation I have, but it's now in the Junction Village bucket.
And I now look at the title. It does say bringing affordable housing home / Junction Village.
Right there, yeah.
So that, so those two open grants are still being held for Junction Village.
Yeah, and they will be spent some of this year in terms of getting to the closing, and then a lot of it's being held for the open space definition and design for the rest of that parcel. And that open space design committee is being recruited now by the select board.
Okay. And so Lee, just one other question. It looks like many of your successful projects have involved blended funding. How hard is that to accomplish, or are the groups fairly open to joining up with you to make it happen?
The Concord Housing Foundation has been extremely supportive and very generous, at least during my tenure on the board. And then we were fortunate to have Habitat for Humanity as a partner in the 930 Main Street project. So far so good. We can only hope we can continue with that level of success going forward.
So I would mention that there is free cash from the town that's available for affordable housing, but the CHDC themselves has pretty much depleted all of their own funds. They had a balance some number of years and have been using that going forward for the small grants program and other expenses, and they have no revenue coming in at all. So that as a funding source or a contributor to projects is not really viable for the future.
Okay, thank you, Liz. John, all set? Thank you, other members of the committee.
Yeah, this is Peter. I had a question. There was mention earlier in the presentation, the creation of a trust, as I recall. And I was just curious as to what the sources of funding might be for that trust to create, even additional leverage as you look at affordable housing projects across the town.
So the affordable housing, it's a municipal affordable housing trust that is created pursuant to statute and approval of town meeting. The initial approval was last year, and then the bylaw was approved at the most recent town meeting. So it's my understanding that the expectation is that future sources of funding for affordable housing would perhaps be deposited into that trust account, and they would be the so-called gatekeeper to distribute the funds as projects become available. But just given the timing of your application process and the town meeting, and because the trustees haven't been named yet, they're not available to do that for this round of appropriations.
John.
Yeah, I just, Peter, I wanted to add that maybe a year ago, the chair of the Affordable Housing Trust, who developed the bylaw, approached me when I was chair on the issue, and I think we'll have to look at it, I'm sure, as a CPC, about whether our funds would eventually go through their trust. It's a long-term issue, but it has certainly was raised about a year ago in terms of whether we would be another source of funding that trust.
Right. Yeah. It just seems like, through this discussion, it's clear that, even the $500,000 is not going to go that far. So hopefully there will be an opportunity to raise additional, funding, to create some leverage here.
So if I just could follow up on that, Lee. So we're in this maybe sort of a gap year, that this 500 would potentially end up in a trust, in the trust?
Well, we're asking for it to be allocated to CHDC, separate and apart from any future funds that the Affordable Housing Trust might be appropriated. But I think the other sources of funding are the pending legislation. I believe it's the building permit surcharge, and it's another one that I keep. Transfer tax, as well as perhaps annual appropriations of free cash that might be, I'm speculating, but rather than just being under the control of the town manager with approval of the select board, might just go directly to the Affordable Housing Trust.
Well, there's maybe some work to do. I mean, I'm sure we're not completely clear on this, but in the future.
But none of that'll happen in the immediate future. That's the whole point. They won't happen this round of appropriation, because none of that legislation's been approved yet.
Right.
And the trust hasn't been constituted yet. That's really the whole point.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, thank you. Questions?
Oh, sorry, these funds stay with the CPC until the project comes forward. So that's always the way it worked. It's the way it worked for 930 Main Street, that the funds were there. And then the CHDC came to the CPC, presented the project to make sure it goes with, so unused funds would just revert back.
Yeah, Liz, thank you. Thank you for that clarification. Other comments from the public or the committee? For Lee or Liz? Yeah, Matt, please.
Yeah, I was trying to understand the relationship between the funds that were appropriated through Article 14 from free cash, the town meeting this year, and this request. I mean, I think Liz made some reference to it and saying that, some funds were available from free cash. I'm just trying to understand, how do those funds get utilized, or can they be utilized by the CHDC? And I just don't understand these different buckets of funds and yeah, how that fits into your plan here.
My understanding is that CHDC would have to approach the town manager and in turn the select board to make a specific request to utilize funds from free cash for a specific project. We have not done that. We do not have a specific project at this time, but so we're asking for the CPC funds through this request as part of the annual appropriation to satisfy its community housing category of distribution. And then depending on what transpires, either we've got enough on hand, or if we had to ask for a portion of the free cash, I presume we could do that at the time as well.
But is there any other entity besides the CHDC that could utilize those funds?
Maybe the housing authority. I'm not.
So I think that the free cash funds from 2 years ago were used by the housing authority for the Giroux property, for the feasibility there, and for some of the pre-engineering work. And the free cash also contributed to the 930 Main Street because the existing CPA funds were not sufficient, because it was only, I think there was $186,000 of CPA funds, and the project, the home cost 500, and whatever it was, $12,000.
Yeah, I'm just confused that it just seems like there's more than one body here. There's a town authorized body that's doing this stuff. I mean, I can understand the housing authority for renovating their facilities, let's say, but it seems strange for production of new housing that the CHDC you'd think would be the folks that were making that happen.
We're certainly in support of that, but again, because the housing trust hasn't been established yet, we don't know, what their charge may be, or what their other sources of funding may end up being, or what the pleasure of the town may be in terms of who's really doing these kind of development projects, or are they just a funding source doling it out as projects come up? So it could well be in future years, if the Affordable Housing Trust is well funded, we're requesting the funds from them rather than from you, or maybe both.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Matt. All set. Yes, Christine.
Yeah, so I'm just trying to get the free cash piece straight in my head. So we've approved that twice, right? So we just approved it for 2021, and prior year we had 2020, and they were both $500,000. Is that right?
Yes.
I believe so.
Okay. So there's $1 million tagged within free cash that's there, or some of it's been used already?
Some of it's been used already.
How much has been used?
I think $350,000.
Okay, so there's 650 there, and then there's another $500,000 that you're asking for here from CPC. So there's about $1.1 million that you would have if this was approved. You would have about $1.1 million.
Well, but I think the question is that it's not really theirs. That the 650 could be spent by somebody else, and that was the confusion I had.
Yeah.
We would have to request that separately.
When we talked about it at the finance committee. So I didn't think there were multiple parties that were going to have access to it. I assumed it was all for the same goal. So.
Well, I think it is for the same goal, but for example, let's just say the Affordable Housing Trust was established next week. I think they could request those funds as well. It's really, the way I understand it, more a question of who's making the decisions as to who's receiving the funds to actually be expended for affordable housing, community housing purposes.
But they would be looking for properties independent of you?
My understanding, and again, it's up to the trustees to decide how they want to operate, but I did serve on the bylaw formation committee, and what we had discussed there was that they most likely will not be set up to act in the role of a developer, but rather just a funding source and an overseer of available town funds to be used for community housing purposes.
Mm-hmm.
But it is, I will say, it is within the bylaw. They do have the authority to own and sell property, but it just remains to be seen whether they'll exercise that level of authority.
But for right now, it's really the CHDC and the Concord Housing Authority are the two entities that have the ability and powers and mission to create new affordable housing units. So it sounds like maybe there's a lot of entities, but really it's just the two. And the Concord Housing Authority has a pretty specific mission for low-income rental. The CHDC has a broader scope in terms of ownership and other kinds of projects.
And which of those two groups is making this request to CPC?
The Concord Housing Development Corporation.
The HDC is making this request.
Right.
Okay.
And specifically for the buy down funds and having those available for market opportunities, and to also have funds available for the purchase of the deed restrictions for Emerson Annex upon expiration. So it's a pretty specific request, even though it doesn't have a property address on it. It's a very, I guess, specific defined use that aligns with the housing production plan and your criteria, for the CPC. So the free cash funds are much more general of affordable housing of any kind.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Lee and Liz. I mean, the purpose of one of the primary purposes for this evening is to clarify and make the applications as good and understandable as they can possibly be. So when we're reviewing them, very soon, we've got it. So it seems like there's still a bit of clarification. There's some nuance here. So I can imagine as we go forward, there may be some additional questions that come from this committee, as we make sure that we kind of understand the kind of family tree and the flow of authority, decision-making and dollars. But I know at the particular request is actually fairly clear. It is in a larger context that's about a future yet to be determined. So I can imagine that there may be some follow-up that we will need, and imagine that you could make yourselves available.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Any other
affordable housing is complicated, so
yeah, no, absolutely, and it's the energy that you're putting into it, and the outcomes are amazing, and there's a huge need, and so we want to, you know, support it the right way, but in a context of being able to report back to our larger community constituents that we're clear about what's happening. Any other questions or comments?
If I could maybe just put a finer point, if this wasn't clear, if the request is granted, it's put in a bucket that your committee continues to control, and then once we had an actual project, we would have to come to you to request a specific amount out of that 500 or whatever amount you agree to allocate to us. So it's really just a placeholder until we have an actual need for it, and then we've got a fact-specific project that will tell you exactly how we will use those funds and work for what purposes.
And the CHDC did that recently with
930 Main Street. Unfortunately, maybe it was longer than the committee would have preferred, but that was just how long it took to have a project. Hopefully, it doesn't take as long next time around.
Okay. All right. Well,
that was going to be my exact question. Is like, what exactly, if this money was appropriated, what exactly happened to it? You just answered that question for me. So thanks.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Paul. Okay. So Lee and Liz, thank you so much for kind of being with us for most of the night and answering questions, not only on this application, but others.
Thank you for your time and consideration and all your hard work. I appreciate it.
Okay, with that, Heather, are we ready to move to the final application?
Yes.
Yes, we are. Okay, that's excellent. Nice work, everybody. And so we are going to be hearing about the staff and technical services proposal. And who will be making the presentation?
I will be.
Okay, very well. Thank you.
All right, so staff and technical services. So the town is requesting funding to support the CPA in Concord by providing staff support from the Department of Planning and Land Management, legal, technical, and consulting assistance for the town's CPA funded projects, supplies and associated administrative requirements, including legal ads, copying, printing, etc., and funding to purchase CPA signage. And the request is for $40,000 again. In order to fund the work of the CPC, the statute specifies that the committee may use up to 5% of their annual revenues each year to fund staff and technical services. And the CPC's admin funds can be used for the same types of expenses budgeted for any town department or committee to carry out their mission, such as employee salaries, office expenses, and contractual services. Since 2008, when CPA was adopted, the town always allocated $30,000 each year towards this project. And we've found over the past couple of years that the $30,000 was not enough funding, and we were constantly overspending that account. So last year, the CPC and town meeting agreed to increase this amount to $40,000. The funding will continue to pay for all of the same expenses that it usually does, which includes the Community Preservation Coalition's annual membership dues, legal advertisements for your public hearings, signage, staff salaries, printing and copying for the CPC, and then any legal counsel or consulting services the CPC may find that they need throughout the year. So like I mentioned before, in both FY19 and FY20, there was not enough funding in this account to cover these basic expenses. And there were no signs purchased during that time, and also no legal or consulting fees. So it was basically just the Community Preservation Coalition membership dues, legal advertisements, and staff salary, and that went over the $30,000 for multiple years. So this is the breakdown of the budget. The Community Preservation Coalition membership dues are $44,350, and they generally increase every year. They did not increase the amount this year due to the COVID-19 pandemic. So it's the same amount that we paid the year prior. Legal advertisements for any public hearings are $45 generally. And then there's a breakdown of CPA signage costs here in the types of signage and what they cost to purchase. And then staff salary budget. In FY20, $26,262 was expended from this account towards my salary to assist the CPC. And in FY19, it was $25,920 that came from this account. So this just shows you the estimates from Crosby Design, who makes all of the CPA signage, and then an example of the CPA signage that we get. And then this is the invoice that we got from the coalition that has already been paid for this year. And I did want to remind everyone that at the end of the year, when the accounts are being closed, the staff and technical services account is always, well, in the past, it wasn't being closed correctly. But the end of the year, it's supposed to be closed and any remaining funds go back into the CPC's general fund so that there's no carryover from year to year. It's either spent and what's not spent is returned to the general fund. So say this year we don't get around to buying all that signage just because of the pandemic and maybe projects aren't getting to construction on, you know, the same time frame they thought they were going to be, so we don't buy signage. Any remaining funds at the end of the year in July will be returned to the CPA funds, that the general bucket. So we'll need the funding next year to purchase signs. And we also need to try to anticipate the projects that we're funding and what types of signs they'll need for the next year, because the budget's always for the next year. So I just wanted to clarify that as well.
Thank you, Heather. And our liaison is Hester. Hester, questions?
Sorry. Again, thank you for the thorough presentation. It seems very straightforward and it's sort of a motherhood and apple pie. Yes, we need to do this. So thank you. I have no question.
Hester, other members of the committee, questions for Heather?
Yes, Peter. Heather, what I don't see here is legal support that we've needed. You know, before town meeting, we usually ask for a review of the recommendations, and I know that's a little bit of a process and probably incurs some expense, but I don't see that here.
Yeah, so if any legal review is done regarding our warrant article, it falls under the town's budget because it's in reference to our warrant article. So this would be if we needed separate legal advice that was outside of related to our warrant article.
I guess I have a follow-up because I recall we did get legal advice regarding the First Parish and Holy Family applications last year. How was that paid for?
We never received an invoice for that. So I'm not sure if the town manager's budget just covered it or if he somehow got it to fall within the warrant article review budget for
Marsha.
No more.
I just know that whenever there's an overage, it comes out of the planning department budget. So every time you've gone over budget, my department pays for it. So if town council's fees were not charged to you, it may have come to me.
Is that typically how it works in town, that if a certain committee needs to have legal advice, that ends up getting charged to that department?
Typically, no. This past year was unique because of the Estabrook Woods litigation, and the budget was just so out of over what was available. And so many departments that had sought legal guidance and consultation this past year did end up putting money toward that budget. In the past, it has all been under the umbrella of town council's budget.
Okay, so that's probably, I don't know what's going to happen with Estabrook Woods. Don't get into that. But it seems like that the precedent then, the normal situation is such that we shouldn't be expecting to pay legal fees.
Unless there was a specific issue that you felt you needed a different counsel for whatever reason, or other consultation.
Specific that was not related to preparation of the warrant article, I guess. Don't know what
Okay, so what we're thinking is that the cost of the Holy Family and First Parish review was related to the warrant article and not to our decision, because that decision came in before we made our decisions
right.
on how to appropriate the funds. It wasn't to justify the warrant article. So I guess that's where I'm confused.
Yeah, Judy, my sense is also, and I know only this much about this, but this hasn't been a black and white issue in the past. It's been, it seems.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but we asked for an opinion basically before, we were deliberating.
Right.
Yeah. Right.
Okay.
Diane.
Yeah, Peter and Judy are spot on. We asked for that opinion in advance, right? So that we could make an adjudication that seems sensible. I wonder if we'll run into the need for a legal determination this time with the tavern. And I'm sorry that I just blanked right now on what it's called, but I mean, I think that's both a church and a town effort. And I think that may require yet again another legal determination. We haven't heard that presentation until next week, but
that's right. Yeah, so the November 10th. That's right.
Right. So I mean, that may require some adjudication, legal adjudication or consideration.
Okay.
From what I understand.
Questions for Heather from the committee? Questions for Heather from the public? Any? Matt?
Well, I guess looking at the breakdown of the budget and seeing that, salary and the association fees are already over $30,000. And then noting the additional costs that you may incur, and that any excess goes back to the CPC at the end. It just seems to me that this may be an under allocated. I mean, we're still well below the 5%. It doesn't seem like 40,000 would necessarily be enough. And so I just am curious, I don't know, should it be more?
Yeah, Matt, thank you for that comment. I guess I would say that there have been a couple of, well, maybe in particular the signage program that we've kind of deferred now. It feels to me like maybe for a couple of years. And,
yeah, it just seems too bad given, that you spent so much on these projects and can't even tell anybody about them.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And I think what we've pledged to do is kind of work through our rather compressed schedule on these applications, but then really tackle that that signage program. So we really come out of this with an ability to, feature those projects or reallocate signs that are in play already. Right. But yeah, there probably is maybe a question, Heather, to say, do we feel like we've made a proposal here, and maybe it's for Marcia as well, for funds that would cover, anticipated signage program that makes up for a couple of years of kind of tabling that. I don't know. What was your allocation budget for signage in this?
There's no specific amount for signage. I just gave the breakdown of signage. What we would need to look at is the projects that we're kind of looking at right now, and what types of signage they may need should they be approved by town meeting and go into construction next year.
Yeah, I think that maybe it's beyond our time here to really look at the number of projects that we have in play right now. They're active projects. Which ones are going to be finishing up, over that next year that may need signs and put that program together. Yeah, Diane.
Well, and absent in effort to make an efficient town meeting this year, Tom, as we all know well, the CPC did not present its funding. But I think in past town meetings, there's been a more detailed sensibility of how CPC has spent its funds. And I think that Heather's idea about putting out signs wherever that's happened can only enhance a sense of the CPC's commitment to many town efforts. So I mean, I think
Well,
ironically, signage of all things is really important.
these are taxpayer dollars put to work.
Absolutely.
Amazing projects, and I think to let taxpayers know where the investments have gone and that they've been completed and they're acknowledged. I think is really important. Yeah. Okay, good. Maybe we, any other questions or comments for Heather on this application? Good shape. Well, thank you. With that, I think we have drawn this part of our agenda to a close. Heather, nice job. And it does move us to our other business category. Heather, what do you think? We're ready to move there?
Yeah, I really don't have
Mhm.
many updates under other business other than minutes.
We have, 3 sets of minutes.
Yeah,
And
and
so,
I'm sorry, I just got them up on the website yesterday, so I don't know if everyone's had a chance to review them.
yeah, so how are we feeling about that? People have had a chance to look at those, Diane?
I would love a little more time. I only just had a chance to quickly look at them. I mentioned to Heather that I was not listed as present. And I just want to comment on Burton. Burton, you look a lot more comfortable.
I was just going to say that. I was just going to say that exact same thing.
We're gonna have to move to adjourn.
Yeah.
Now, at any rate, I was in attendance at a meeting that where my presence was not recognized, but otherwise I haven't had a chance to really read them carefully, Heather.
Well, let's have a question, Heather, for you, and that is, I think at our last meeting we cleaned up some kind of outstanding minutes from the past, and these are looks like October 13th, 17th, and 20th. Am I right about that?
Yeah, they're all fairly recent meetings, so I think it's perfectly okay to
We
continue.
go till the 10th.
Yeah.
Judy?
I have a request, Heather. I know why they're put up as PDFs on the website. That makes sense. However, I found a number of typos in there, but I don't have any way of editing the document and sending it to you. Is there any way that we could receive those minutes in a Word document? Because it would be much more efficient if there are those minor type of changes to edit them and send them back to you.
Okay, yeah, I can do that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, John.
Heather, I think on the 13th and the 20th, it may be that Mr. Kearns explained how to use the raised hand function.
Thank you, John.
Not me.
Yeah, thank you, John.
I suspect it was the chair.
Yes, thank you. And we'll go through these more thoroughly on November 10th, John, if you agree.
Oh, yeah. No, I agree. I just wanted that just occurred twice.
Yes, yeah, thank you so much.
And otherwise, Heather, I'll send you a couple things.
Okay.
All right, good work, everyone. Any last comments, reflections, or other business that we haven't covered? Everybody good shape, Diane?
I just want to say how interesting the meeting was tonight, Tom. I learned a lot from the presenters, and I'm very grateful for their efforts. There were things I didn't understand in their original presentations, and I thought the clarifications tonight were very helpful, and I just want to acknowledge.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that. We are so blessed with volunteers and professional staff that are excellent. It's just really, really wonderful. So good. We ready to adjourn? Somebody like to make a motion?
I move that we adjourn.
Second.
Thank you. We have a second, and we need to vote. And Tom, yay. Peter?
Yay.
Judy?
Hey.
Paul?
Yes.
Burton?
Yes.
Hester?
Yes.
Diane?
Yay.
John?
Yes.
Unanimous. Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Great
you.
work.
Thank you.
Thanks. Good night.
Everyone.
On the 10th.